November the 23rd, 1989, and possibly the most influential British guitar band of the last 20 years were making their debut on Top of the Pops. The group were Manchester's The Stone Roses.
Musically, they could have been bigger than the Beatles, you know, because they had it.
Having just released one of the most acclaimed debut albums of all time, they had the world at their feet.
They was fresh, they was real, and the music that he was doing was just brilliant.
But then it all went horribly wrong. Within a few short years, the Stone Roses had split.
I don't like the way it ended. It was all messy and in the business of making music, not in the business of fucking ruining friendship.
Who was to blame for the Stone Roses' downfall? Some accused their manager, Gareth Evans.
I gave that band 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I did it for that band.
He was a salesman, but, you know, a rather nasty, cheap salesman.
I'm a fucking good manager. I'm a genius. I'm the best.
This is the inside story of how a band on the verge of greatness saw their world fall apart, their career destroyed by bad business deals and multi-million-pound lawsuits.
People ask me, why take them to court? Why the aggravation? I wanted my money.
The guy's got no morals whatsoever. But, you know, one day it's going to come back and bite him on the arse hard. I can't wait to piss in his grave.
For years before their legendary appearance on Top of the Pops, the Stone Roses were still a million miles away from success. Suffering from an image problem and hated by most of Manchester, the band had hit rock bottom. Rhythm guitarist with the Stone Roses then was Andy Cousins.
We'd been blacklisted by, it felt like the whole of Manchester was pushing us out, you know, City Life, who were the local ride factory, everybody, we couldn't get any gigs anywhere, it was just a nightmare.
The Roses' number one enemy was Manchester's Factory Records, the brainchild of local impresario Tony Wilson and home to such bands as the painfully cool Joy Division.
Tony Wilson hated us. He actively tried to stop us doing anything. You know, every corner we turned, we felt like he was there shutting the door. You know, it was. But we wanted nothing to do with them at all.
All the people that worked for Factory were fucking squares, you know. They had the grey overcoat mob banging on in coffee bars about poetry, you know, and going to see films with subtitles. Very fucking dodgy people.
How does it feel to treat me like you do?
But if Manchester hated the Stone Roses, the feeling was mutual.
The music scene, we were always separate from it. We actively made sure that we were separate from it. I mean, our first gig, it wasn't by any accident that it was in London, it was by design. We didn't want to play, we didn't want to be associated with Manchester at all. It was a horrible place.
To show their contempt for their hometown, the Stone Roses took to the streets.
We went out and sprayed Manchester's monuments. I think we were barred for life at that point from the likes of City Life, and there was absolute uproar all over Manchester, but yeah, it was very funny.
One person who definitely didn't see the funny side was the Roses' first manager, Howard Jones.
I thought it was disgraceful, but I understood their reasons for doing it. They were trying to say to Manchester, the Tony Wilsons of this world, F you, mate, you know, people are going to know we're here.
But the message wasn't getting through. In 1985, the Stone Roses unleashed their first single on an unsuspecting public. It was met with disastrous reviews.
With hindsight, none of us were happy with the way it came out at all. At the time, I think we were probably excited by it, but later on you listen and think...
By now, Howard Jones's other role as head of the band's label, Thin Line, had become a major bone of contention.
could never quite tell where his interests were, you know. And then when you start to realise that he's got 20% of the record sales as a manager and 20% from Thin Line, and that started feeling a little dirty.
Jones was given a stark choice: his label or the group.
And I made the decision that Thin Line was more important than managing the Stone Roses, which I still stand by.
With no gigs, no manager and no record deal, the Stone Roses were in a rut. What they needed was help, and fast.
They seek him here, they seek him there. His clothes are loud, but never square.
The man they turned to would become the key figure in both the Roses' meteoric rise and their downfall.
'Cause he's a dedicated follower of fashion.
Music promoter Gareth Evans' first foray into business had seen him take on and conquer the cutthroat world of hairdressing.
I went to have my hair cut at Vida Sassoon as a model, and he personally asked me to work for him. He said I looked the part.
Selects with hues and stripes, 'cause he's a dedicated follower of fashion.
In all, I had 11 salons and 5 or 6 franchises under our name, Gareth and Colin Crimpers. I had 2 in Piccadilly, Manchester, Rusholme, Bolton, Stretford, Manchester, Burnley, etc.
Evans' reputation as the best blow-waver north of Watford led to an ever more impressive client list.
Whose hair did I cut? Martin Buchan, ex-Scotland and Manchester United captain, Peter Barnes of Manchester City, and their wives.
But Evans would eventually hang up his scissors to cash in on Manchester's very own rock and roll revolution. By the mid-80s, the Northwest had become a breeding ground for some of the hottest new talent about. Bands like the Happy Mondays, fronted by the legendary Shaun Ryder, were putting Manchester on the musical map.
It was a mishmash, total mishmash. You know, I mean, you had us, and then you had Spiral Carpets, Simply Red, Swing Out Sister. You know, so we was a proper melting pot of music.
There was a vibrant music scene in Manchester, and I wanted to be part of it.
Evans got his chance when the lease for local nightclub Ocean's 11 came up for grabs.
So I popped in, and the offices above, the landlord was there, and I did a deal to lease it off him.
Renaming the club the International, Evans quickly established it as the main rival to Factory's Hacienda.
International was like an old 70s nightclub, you know, a carpet on the floor. It was a great place for a gig. I mean, the sound was shit. But it was an old, you know, it was an old nightclub.
Look at this place. Look what they've done to it. The International. This was the famous International. They used to queue all the way down here. Way down there for R.E.M., Simply Red, all the bands.
From down on Capitol Hill, we tried it. Money too tight to mention. I can't get an unemployment extension. Money too tight to mention.
It was a dump. You wipe your feet on the way out. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't a place where you'd take your girlfriend on a first date.
Well, it's now Venus Foos or Food Centre. Fabulous times, great memories. I loved it.
But Evans wanted more.
People try to put us to down.
Although he'd soon added a second club to his name, Evans began to realise that the really big money to be made from music lay in managing groups. In 1986, he placed an ad in his local paper which would give him his big chance.
I always had what it takes, and I knew I could do the job. And obviously a lot of bands, I saw a lot of bands, and people did ask me to manage them, and I refused a lot. Well, I did, I refused everyone.
I could have given Gareth a piece of wood and said, compare the merits of this piece of wood to this album, and he would have said, I can't tell the difference.
A lot of the so-called Manchester music scene, this probably includes Tony Wilson, Howard Jones, they didn't know about my background. I mean, remember, I'd had Keith Moon in a Ford Zephyr. driving him around Manchester.
He now tells everybody that he was a mod in the 60s and, he was a sort of ace face, which is laughable, As far as I'm aware, Gareth never had any musical taste whatsoever.
Despite these question marks over his musical pedigree, Evans's search paid off when a young, managerless band called the Stone Roses turned up unannounced at the International.
I didn't really have to convince the band that I was the manager for them, because they came to a lot of the gigs we did. A lot may be an exaggeration, but they saw I always had a small entourage and I was always around. And maybe I looked the part in those days. I was a lot younger.
First meeting with Gareth Evans, he was very, very cheesy the whole way through. All the time he had a roll of money with a rubber band around it. And every time he stood up or sat down, this money would drop out. Just constant. Like, look at me, I've got money, which was just farcical.
I really do believe they saw something about me.
Gareth was one of those men who got a bit of a paunch, slightly overweight, wearing tracksuit bottoms with a piss stain on the front, and an old pair of trainers.
Halfway through the meeting, Evans played his trump card.
He said, I sell underpants. He dropped his trousers and he said, I'll sell these. It was just insane.
I only pulled my trousers down, showed my knickers. It went no further.
Swayed by Evans's sophisticated selling technique, the band sat down to discuss a contract.
It was a parental guardianship agreement rather than a music business management agreement, which gave him all sorts of rights over all of us,
Crucially, the contract gave Evans and his business partner a hefty third of the band's earnings for a staggering 10 years.
I think you have to have 10 years with a band if you're serious about it. What is this 1 year and 2 years and 3 years? It's a load of nonsense.
Someone who's seen more than his fair share of management contracts is music lawyer James Ware.
Looking at a management contract which contains a commission of 33.33% on gross revenue, that's before you've taken any expenses, and a 10-year term, we're looking at a contract that's not only extortionate, it's outrageous.
So outrageous that Andy Cousins refused to sign. With no official contract, Gareth Evans now faced the problem of what to do about the rebel, Andy Cousins.
I wasn't keen to get Andy out. I never thought of it until John Squire told me he didn't like writing with Andy in a low voice. And he said to me he had to go, but he didn't know how to do it, so I did it.
Evans's method was simple but effective, to drive a wedge between Cousins and the rest of the band, in particular singer Ian Brown and lead guitarist John Squire.
They were doing most of the songs at that point. Andy Cousins was doing some, but I straight away thought McCartney and Lennon, Squire and Brown.
Gareth wanting me out was nothing to do with creative hubs or any of those things. It was purely a control aspect from his point of view.
Andy didn't have any talent. Andy was an old-style rocker, and that wasn't the way they were going.
With Cousins refusing to budge, events took a dramatic turn.
Gareth offered me 10,000 quid to leave the band. I should have taken it because he was desperate to get rid of me.
If I'd have made Andy Cousins a cash offer to make him leave, and maybe I did, he would have took the money. There isn't a man on this planet that wouldn't have took £10,000.
Finally, the dispute came to a head.
We had a gig in Dublin, and I'd got something to do on the Monday morning. So I booked myself a plane home. I didn't think anything of it.
Smelling blood, Evans accused Cousins of being disloyal.
I blew my top. I was very annoyed. What a dramatic statement, but they went in a van together, they should come back together.
For someone to miss that journey back to me is wrong, is wrong. and I could see in the band's eyes that they